Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great honor for me to be in your midst and share my study on the Shahnameh and its reception in South Asia or Indian subcontinent. As you know that the very concept of preservation and conservation is a very sophisticated and developed concept. And we think that this concept has dawned upon us because we have been living in an age of civilization. But millennium ago also, people were striving to preserve and conserve their heritage and save it from destruction or ravages of time. So today at the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Nanda, the mover and shaker of today's program, for preserving the heritage of Humayun tomb. Similarly, I am beholden to the Microfilm Center, again a step towards preserving the tangible heritage of manuscripts in the form of microfilms. And similarly, I am beholden to the Cultural Counselor of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Dr. Fariduddin Farid Asr, for preserving the memory of Firdausi in Iran beyond Iran. So the place, the time which we are sharing today is in fact an Iran beyond Iran. As Fitzgerald has beautifully translated a Rubayat of Umar Khayyam, where he says that, look to the rose that blows around us. Low laughing it says, into the world I blow. At once the silken tassel of my purse tear and its treasure on the garden throw. It is in fact the muse of this evening. Centuries ago, millennium ago, had thrown the treasure by breaking the tassel of the purse in order to preserve the memory of Iran. Because we see that long back, when there was in fact a clash of civilization about to begin in the 7th century, when the Arabs had invaded Iran. At that time, Iran was at a threshold of entering into a new era, an epoch, which was an Islamic Persia. And in that Islamic Persia, it was more the Arabic civilization which would pervade, which would be the dominant key player in shaping the contour of Persian civilization. And Persian language could not withstand that onslaught of Arabia, because today the language which we speak after a silence of 200 years, this language evolved. Per se, Persian language, which is considered to be a descendant of the Pahlavi language, the continuum is very much there, because the words, the syntax, the grammar remained the same. Only the vocabulary, Arabic vocabulary and Arabic phrases entered into the language and had given a distinct script and tone and tenor. And it became Neo-Persian, with which we are mostly familiar, and the Shahnameh came to be written in that language. But the language could be written in the garb of Arabic or Perso-Arabic script. But certainly the language is not Arabic. It is for all intents and purposes an Aryan language, quite contrary to the Semitic language, because the Semitic language had its own nuances, it had its own syntax and grammar, and quite different from that language happened to be the Persian or the Pahlavi language. In that language, we don't find the difficulty of gender. That is one of the best summum bonum of learning the language, that we don't have any problem of gender. The gender problem is a big problem in speaking a language. For example, I can speak Bengali better than my own mother tongue, Urdu. My mother tongue is Urdu, but I'm afraid of speaking Urdu because of the presence of gender nuances in the language. Where it is masculine, where it is feminine, it poses a great threat to me while speaking Urdu language. I have to be extra cautious, and very often I have to look up the dictionary in order to find out whether the word is masculine or feminine. But in Bengali, when I speak, I don't have any problem, which is my second language. I don't have any problem because there is no gender problem in Bengali language. So one can easily and freely speak this language. As far as Arabic is concerned, again, the gender is a big problem in Arabic language. And those who know Arabic language, because even the numericals have gender. For example, 1, 2, 3 has a different set of rules governing the gender. Again, 3, 4 has different set of rule. From 4 to 7 has a different set of rules. 9 to 10 has different set of rule, and then it goes on. So the language is governed by a very strict application of grammatical rules. Persian is not like that. It's a free language, and it is a language of those who are free thinkers. They can play with this language in any fashion they feel like. And the best example is that we in India, whose mother tongue is Urdu, and it is just Urdu is an offshoot of Persian. It's a byproduct of Persian. It's a branch of Persian. So at times when we speak Persian, it seems that we are speaking Urdu. And at times when we speak Urdu, it appears that we are speaking Persian. Nahi minnat kashe tabe shanidan dasta meri. There is only 2 words, nahi and meri, and the rest construction is Persian. And any Persian speaker can easily understand that what the poet wants to say. Nahi minnat kashe tabe shanidan dasta meri. Khamoshi guftugu hai bezabaan hai zaba meri. So ladies and gentlemen, that was a big problem. Arabic began to dominate over Persian life and letters. So how to negotiate that phenomena was a big problem, and a problem which was a lingering problem for the Iranians. And language was such a thing that is associated with identity. If I speak, or if I cease to speak Urdu, if I cease to speak Bengali, I lose my identity. So language is somewhat linked with identity. Whether you are on the other side of Punjab or on this side of Punjab, for all practical purposes, you are a Punjabi and you speak Punjabi language. That forms the identity. And that really overcomes the divide of partition. When the 2 Punjabi speaking people meet, there was no partition for them. They speak in the language and they enjoy that bonhomie as if nothing had happened. That language binds people. So the area in which you would see Shahnameh is looming large upon is an area from the river Sir Darya, or Jazardax, what we call, that is the Sir Darya, or Sehun, what we call. it goes up to the of Tigris, if not Euphrates. The Arabs had demarcated that part of, during the time of Caliphate, of Second Caliphate Umar, he said, let there be a demarcation between Ajam and Arab, and Euphrates, let it form the divide. The other side would be Persian side and the other side would be Arabic side. But again, that was not the divide was the Tigris River, what we call the Dajla. There, at the bank of Dajla, you could see the presence of the city called Ctesiphon or Seleucia. It was Madayan. And any Persian who tries to visit that place, he is fraught with that feeling of Sasanian period, because that was the Sasanian capital. The Ctesiphon was so associated, the Seleucia was so associated with Iranian ethos that not for a moment an Iranian would forget his identity. So Iranian identity is forged by so many elements: the place, the river, the language, the food, and above all, the sensibility. That is the most important thing, that how an Iranian sense, what is his sensibility. The Shahnameh, what we are talking about today, was an attempt by Firdausi way back in 1010, when Iran had got some autonomy under the Abbasid rule, to revive its language, literature and culture. At that time, in the beginning of the 10th century, that is around 840s, you could see in the eastern side of Iran, which was Khorasan at that time, and it was watered by two rivers, the Sir Darya and the Amu Darya, the Oxus and the Jazetas, what we call. In between these two places, the land of Khorasan, the land of the rising sun, what etymologically is referred to, Khorasan means the land of the rising sun. Their Persian culture was evolving, was resurfacing, and one could see the emergence of not only Persian language and Persian culture, like the celebration of the festival of Nowruz and Chahar Saddasuri and other festivals, but also literature. Literature which the Iranians had lost long back. They had lost their literature because all the Avestan literature had receded into oblivion. There was no literature per se available to them written in the modern or Neo-Persian language. So, for the first time, one could see Firdausi trying to collect the lores of Iran past. These lores were there, preserved by the Mobids, the Zoroastrians of Iran, and they held it very close to their heart and chest. And Firdausi he had the curiosity to revive them, to put them into popular discourse and then versify them. It was not an overnight assignment for him. It was a lifelong project for him, almost 30 years. Imagine the man was located in a place called Tus, way back in the end of the 10th century, when the resources were too limited and he had no access to treasures, because there were two lives. One life was there in Tus and the other life was in Ghazna, which was adorned by poets like Unsuri, Asjadi, Farrukhi, and they were having a luxurious life in the city of Ghazna. And Ghazna was such a city at that time that one of the Sufi poets who has said that you have seen many cities like of China and Rome. Come and look at the city of Sinai, which is Ghazna. Ghazna was made a beautiful city. Of course, the money was looted from Somnath. Mahmud had invaded India many times, according to Romila Thapar once or twice. But other historians maintain that he had invaded 15 or 17 times. Whatever could be the number of times doesn't justify his act of plundering the country. But however, that was the fashion of the day. This is how a ruler would fill his coffers. He would invade the other. Even today, what we could see, when American president would be eager to have the nuclear dust in American coffer, the reason is that perhaps he would become not richer in wisdom, but richer in materialism, I think so. That could be the only take on Iran that is he is having. However, so those poets who were adorning the courts at Ghazna, there it is the contemporary sources say that their household utensils were made of silver and gold. Imagine that Unsuri was the court poet of Mahmud of Ghazna, and he did not have steel or aluminium or iron utensils, spoons and quarter plates and full plates and bowls. He had silver, and there was no dust in his house. It was all silver. So they had a very luxurious life. But that was the life of artisans, not artists. The artist was far from the madding crowd. He was living in Tugs, where the resources were too limited. He did not have money, but he did have the spirit, the magnanimity, the inclination, the clemency, the feeling, the pathos, the concern for preserving the heritage and culture of Iran. And thus, he embarked on a very lifelong project, which was the compilation of Shahnameh. Now, Shahnameh is a piece of literature. When we see, yes, it is an epic. Like all other epics, whether it is the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Iliad, the Odyssey, or any epic you mention, we have two types of epic. One is the primary epic and the other is the secondary epic. So the primary epic is somewhat held at a higher pedestal rather than the secondary epic. For example, when you talk about Milton's Paradise Lost, it could be treated as a secondary epic, not a primary epic, because the English writers or poets, they were trying to imitate the epics written in Latin, written in Greek, and they were writing in English. They wanted to recreate the epic. So our epic writer, or the poet about whom we are discussing today, happened to be a writer who had produced an original piece of literature for those people who had lost their literary heritage. And I said in terms of time and space, the time and space was too big. Imagine what could be the expanse of the region from West Asia down to Central Asia. If you take that chunk of Asia from West Asia to Central Asia, from the farthest corner of West Asia to the farthest corner of Central Asia, that was the domain in which this epic was to be read and appreciated, and would be read and appreciated. So his project was that big project. But certainly every project has to be rewarded. There are sources, there are authorities who attribute the entire project to one idea, that he had composed the epic with a view to getting reward from Mahmud of Ghazna. That could be one way of looking at the entire exercise. But whether he was rewarded or he was not rewarded, or he was rewarded, he was expecting golden coins and in return he was given silver coins, or he was posthumously rewarded, these are some of the questions which have not been answered till date. However, one source point out that when he wrote this epic, I would be discussing the structure of the epic in a little while, that when he wrote this epic, he wanted a reward from the Sultan, and the reward was not to make his life luxurious. It is said that the river used to come and devastate the entire place of Tus, and he wanted to make a dam there, and to construct a dam one needed lots of money, and he wanted, if he would get the reward from Mahmud of Ghazna, he would construct a dam in order to promote agriculture and secure a livelihood for the people in his village. That is one supposition which is again open to question. However, when he wrote the entire Shahnameh, what are the beauties of this piece of literature? First of all, it was written in a language which is spoken even today. That is, we are speaking the language of Firdausi today. Not that Firdausi wrote a language which became obsolete. It is going to be 1,000 years. We don't know 200 years back how Urdu was spoken, or 300 years back how Urdu was spoken in this city where we are living. Within 200 years, we could see that how language undergoes changes. Imagine 1,000 years have passed by and the language of Firdausi is still in vogue and spoken and heard. It's miracle altogether. That could not be held in case of Chaucer. The English of Chaucer and the English what the English people speak is a great difference. It has great difference. But in case of Firdausi, we don't have that hiatus, that gap in language. The language of Firdausi is the language of Persians, and the language of Persians is the language of Firdausi. Now this corpus, how did he conceive and how did he structure the entire corpus? The structure is very scientific. I have myself tried to find out whether historically the narrative is chronologically okay, historically compatible, or there is a sharp departure from history. Categorically, I have tried to work point by point, and I found that no, there isn't a slight departure as when the historical narrative is there. So we have the entire Shahnameh being divided into two parts mainly, if not three parts. One is the mythological era, in which you have the mythological kings who don't have any historical basis. But again, the other period is the period of Pishdadian. That means the lawgivers, the kings who gave law to humanity. That lawgivers, the kings who were giving law to people. And before that, there were many kings who had many first achievements to their credit. For example, Hoshang was the king. What did he do? He was the person who had discovered fire. The fire was never available to people. So it was his discovery that he discovered fire. Discovery of fire in Iranian civilization has been aptly drawn and diligently presented by Firdausi in the Shahnameh, and believe me, this fire becomes the symbol of worship in Zoroastrian tradition, where when the Muslims started questioning the presence of fire in Islamic society and accusing the Zoroastrian prophet not to be the prophet, then Firdausi rebutted their stance, and he says that Maguid ke atish parastan buvad, parastandaye pake yastan buvad. Don't look them as the worshippers of fire. They are the worshippers of God the Almighty. This is how he tries to defend. And the presence of fire plays such an important role in entire human civilization is amazing. It depends on people and on it, as the beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. There are 4 elements in nature. When Iqbal talks about Sufism, that Sufism has 4 elements. One is what we call the clay, the water, the air, and the fire. These 3 elements, the clay, the water, and the air, are readily available in nature. But what about fire? Fire is not readily available in nature. One has to bring about fire in nature. It is not readily available because it was discovered by Hoshan. We never say that any king had discovered air or earth or water, but fire was discovered, and fire plays such an important role in a place like Iran, in a country like Iran, that without fire the life happens to be incomplete, because love is also denoted. The metaphor for love in Rumi's entire discourse, poetic discourse, you would see that the metaphor for love is fire again. Now again the Iranian tries to appropriate Rumi's work to their culture. They say that if Firdausi's Shahnameh is the national epic of Iran, certainly the Masnavi of Rumi is the spiritual epic of Iranians. Again, it brings them in confrontation with the Turks, who had usurped and who have appropriated Rumi for their own, and the Afghans had appropriated Rumi because Rumi was born in Balkh, and Balkh happened to be in present-day Afghanistan. That has opened a lot of confrontation and counterclaims among nations that Rumi would belong to who. However, so that is how the concept of fire is being discussed and fire plays a very important role in purification, in sterilization, in everything. How you are going to make things pure, how to make it bacteria free. Again, fire plays. So the King Hoshan was credited with the discovery of fire. Again, there was another king whose name was Jamshid. What did he do? He was the man who had discovered alcohol and wine. His discovery of wine, that how to make wine becomes again a very popular motive in Persian poetry. So this wine, and then the wine glass he had, which was known as the Jame Jamshid, in which he would see the affairs of the kingdom wherever he had his rule. The entire sway of Iranian rule would be seen in that cup which was known as Jame Jam, or the goblet of Jamshid. But again, Jamshid was blessed by the king, by God. And he had fur, that means the sacred halo around his head. But once that ego had taken over him and he claimed himself to be God, then his downfall was certain, and he was supposed to meet a tyrant king who was Zahak, who rose from Arabia and who came and who invaded the kingdom and brought the downfall of entire kingdom of Jamshid and took over Persia under his control. Now Jamshid was killed by Zahak, and instead a reign of terror was established in Iran. This man, whose name was Zahak, was not of Iranian stock. He was from Arabia. And when he came and he began his rule, it was plagued by terror. There was torture going around here, injustice, and all sorts of unrest, turmoil was there rife in Persia. And he was taken over by an evil spirit. So the discourse of the good and the evil, that enters into the poetic discourse of Ferdowsi, and Ferdowsi says that there is nothing but they are the alternate day and night. You could see that this alternate day and night are being represented by the evil and the good forces, which are constantly in conflict with each other, and ultimately the good prevail over the bad. That is the idea which was propounded by Ferdowsi in the Shahnameh, which was couched in the story of Zahak. So Zahak had a chef who was again an evil spirit, and he would make beautiful dishes, very delicious cuisine for Zahak every day. Now when he made all those delicious food, because by that time Iranians were vegetarians, they did not eat meat. They did not know what was meat, because there was agricultural society. They wanted to have all those cattle and cows for their agricultural life, and they would not take meat. They were vegetarian. And for the first time we could see that non-vegetarian food was prepared by this chef and served to the serpent king Zahak. Zahak became hitherto he was not a serpent king, but he was simply known as Zahak. But the chef was rewarded. He said that the chef had served me such delicious dish, I want to reward him. He said that, Your Majesty, allow me to kiss your shoulders only. That is the only reward I want. He was allowed, and when he kissed the shoulders of the king, 2 serpents sprang up from his shoulders, and those 2 serpents made the life of Zahak miserable. And when his life was made miserable, again the chef or the evil, the Satan, came in the garb of a physician, and he said the only cure that you would have to get relief from this serpent, you have to feed the brains of 2 young boys every day. So every day 2 young boys were slaughtered, their brains were fed, and then he would go to sleep. Now this was going on day in and day out. Certainly one day there was a soothsayer who came to his court, and he said that, Zahak, your downfall was seen. It was a writing on the wall. A woman is going to give birth to a child who would bring about your downfall. Then the king ordered that every pregnant woman must be killed, just like the biblical story of Moses and the Pharaoh. So every pregnant woman was killed. The one lady, Faranak, who was also expecting a child, she ran away to a hilltop. And she was living there, and she gave birth to a child who was attended by mother cow. And the mother cow fed the child, who grew up as Faridun in Iranian history. So Faridun came down from the hill, and he was aided and abetted by an ironsmith whose name was Kaveh, the ironsmith, Ahangar, and they led a revolt against the king, and the king was killed. Now this is the nucleus of Shahnameh, because from here one could see that how the narrative becomes multiple narratives, and it becomes more embellished. Faridun had got rid of Zahak and ushered in the rule of peace and prosperity. When the land became prosperous, Faridun had 3 sons. These 3 sons were Salm, Iraj, and Tur. These 3 sons, he became old, and the aging father wanted to divide his entire kingdom among his 3 sons. So he gave West Asia to Salm, and bestowed Iran upon Iraj, who was the younger brother, and he gave Turkestan, or the entire Turkish-speaking area, to his eldest son, Tur. So when the entire kingdom was divided, the two brothers conspired against Iraj, saying that the best part of the kingdom was given to Iraj. And Iraj was an epitome of culture and nobility. So the two brothers invited Iraj to their camp, and then they killed him and thereby wanted to usurp Iran. When they killed him, and there beautifully Firdausi says that do not hurt an ant, because an ant also has life which is sweet. And this line is a proverbial line in Persian language and literature. I am referring to all these things. You would find the resonance of that in the subcontinent. Why I have been too selective, because I would be correlating it in the Indian subcontinent when I would be discussing about Mirza Ghalib, about Guru Gobind Singh, and about Esami, who represented the Shahnameh writing in different points of history in our Indian subcontinent. However, when the old and aging Faridun saw that his other two sons had killed the innocent Iraj, he could not fight against his sons because he had become too old. Then he went to Zabulistan, which is in modern day Afghanistan. From there he brought the Pahlwans. So one could see the entry of Pahlwans into Shahnameh from that point. That is why I said that this is the nucleus of the narrative. From here you could see that how Shahnameh is becoming or burgeoning into a mighty branched tree. Would be branching of different stories and different narratives. It becomes a multiple narratives literature, and how structures become multiple structures from this point of time. So he brought a line of Pahlwans. We could see that when he brought Sam, Nariman, and Zal, and Rustam, you have an entire line of Pahlwans who would be contesting against the Turanians in history. These contestation between Iran and Turan, you could see that from this point of time, Iran is always in conflict with Turan. There is a fight between, so you could see the two identities emerging out of Shahnameh, though both of them are Irani, but they are not Iranians from that point of time, because after after killing Iraj, who represented the epitome of Persian civility and culture, they were constantly in fight with each other. So that fight between Iran and Turan become a long narrative. And then you could see that Zal, the son of Nariman and Sam, who were brought as Pahlwans from Zabulistan to fight against the Turanians. From there was a child born to Nariman, whose name was Sam, whose name was Zal. So Zal was a weird child. He had white hair. And when the child had white hair, the parents became very much apprehensive whether it was a normal child or not. So the child was abandoned in the hill, and the child was attended by a fabulous bird which was known as phoenix or Simurg or Senmurg in Iranian history. So Simurg was a fabulous bird. It was mother to Zal, and a motherly figure to the house of Pahlwans. Whenever there would be disaster or any catastrophe falling on the house of the Pahlwans, Simurg would appear invariably and would cure it. It was a troubleshooter. So the appearance of Simurg is again so fabulous that for example, if it flutters wing once or twice, it would travel from India to America within a fraction of a minute altogether. It was more supersonic than any American plane would fly in the air. So that was the charisma and the persona of Seymour. Seymour was also a physician. Seymour was also everything. So you could see the presence of Seymour in the house of the Pahlwans, and then Rustam, who was fighting his counterpart, who was in Turan, who was a king of Turan. His name was Afrasiab. This Afrasiab was a person who was so cunning and so evasive as an eel, one could never catch hold of him. And Rustam being the mightiest of the mighty. You know, Rustam is considered, is a metaphor for valor, is a metaphor for manliness. What Mirani says that शेर की आमद है कि रन कांप रहा है, रन एक तरफ चरखे कोहन कांप रहा है, रुस्तम का जिगर ज़ेर कफन कांप रहा है. So that Rustam, with all its might, dead, but is shivering because of the advent of Imam Hussain in the battlefield. This is how Mirani tries to correlate the might of Hussain overdoing the might of Rustam, who was dead in the coffer, but still when he would see the presence of Imam Hussain, he would shudder in his coffin. However, so Rustam is he is invincible, but his counterpart with which he would be contesting all through Shahnameh would be Afrasiab. And Afrasiab was so cunning that even it is said that if the mountain would hear the name of Afrasiab, these are the words I'm giving you the English translation, I'm not quoting the Persian, let me quote the Persian one. Agar beshnavad naam Afrasiab, shabad kuhe ahan chu darya ye aab, agar beshnavad naam Afrasiab, if the mountain hears the name of Afrasiab, the iron mountain will melt like water. That was the fear Afrasiab used to hold in entire West Asia and Central Asia. So he was a formidable enemy, and Rustam had to defend his country and fight against Afrasiab. So the narrative goes on. It's a fight between Iran and Turan. Now comes, after a long let us enter into the historical period of the Shahnameh. This historical period is so beautifully drawn by Firdausi, and one could see that how Firdausi the Iranian genius is that today you are observing how Iran is fighting against America in our present scenario. I'm not going into it because I'm not a strategist and I'm not a scholar of geopolitics, but I would like to suggest, it's just a suggestion, that what is Iranian genius? The Iranians, if you allow any Iranian minister to remain in India as your guest for a year, this is my belief that he is going to appropriate India as Iran very soon. He would say that Iran is India, and he would deal it in such a beautiful manner that diplomatically everybody will yield to whatever logic he would present. So what happens that, for example, a ghazal. Just I would like to draw your attention to a genre of poetry. That ghazal is not a separate form of poetry. Ghazal is not a separate form of poetry. It is already there in Qasida, ode. So you have two forms of poetry. One is the ode and the other is the lyric. So there is no lyric per se in poetry. It is only the ode. And the Arabs wrote poetry in the form of ode only. They did not have any ghazal or anything called ghazal. When the Iranians were excelling Arabic literature, leaving behind the Arabs, they detected that, oh my God, there is an element of ghazal in ode. So they extracted from ode lyric and made it their own form of poetry. It is not their form of poetry. It is per se a patent of the Arabs. But it is the genius of the Iranians that they extracted, deducted ghazal from ode and made it a separate form of poetry. And you could see that ghazal singing is so much popular in India and subcontinent, and it has formed a vital mode of expression in poetics of Iran and Urdu. So what Iqbal has said, that zara si baat thi andeshe ajam ne use बढ़ा दिया है फ़क़त ज़ेब दास्तां के लिए. It is only a simple, trivial matter, but they know how to adorn their narrative, how to embellish their narrative. This art they know beautifully. So here we could see that there is a historical period called the Achaemenid period. In that Achaemenid period, the appearance of kings like Cyrus and Darius and Xerxes and so many other kings were there. But again, that Darius the Koduman, when the rule of Darius the Koduman comes, he was overtaken by Alexander from Macedonia. When Alexander from Macedonia came to Iran to bring about an end to the Achaemenid rule, Firdausi tries to appropriate him to the Achaemenid dynasty and not as a Macedonian. And that is why you find that Alexander is not an alien in Iranian literature. But the Parsis don't like this idea. The Parsis call him Gujastak. That means eternally damned in fire. He would, as long as Alexander, the concept of Alexander is there, he would be burning in fire. That is the meaning of Gujastak in Pahlavi. But the Iranians tried to make him a figure, a persona, very much Iranian. And as if that he came and he continued the legacy of the Achaemenid in Iran. And that is why you find that Nizami has made Alexander a prophet. He was a prophet, Zulqarnain. He was identified as Zulqarnain in Islamic literature. So this is how Alexander is being treated by Firdausi in the Shahnameh, more as an Iranian rather than a Greek or a rank outsider. So afterwards you could see that the narrative goes on from the Achaemenid to the Parthians. The Parthians had ruled for a very long period in history, for more than 400 years. But there is a very small representation of the Parthians or the Arthasides in the Shahnameh. And then finally you come to the space of the Sasanians, who were the greatest of the greatest dynasties who had ever ruled Iran, where you could see the beautiful efflorescence of Iranian culture and civilization. It was during the Sasanian period, the Panchtantra was taken from India to Iran and translated as Kalilag va Dimnag. Again, the play of the game of chess was taken from India, or it was evolved in Iran. And then all the Zoroastrian literature began to be compiled during the Sasanian period, like Zandopa, Zand and Avesta, and Avestan script was written, and the religion of Zoroastrianism was accorded the official status in Iran, and Iran became a Zoroastrian Persia throughout the Sasanian period. And then finally you could see that the Arabs are coming and invading Iran and terminating the Sasanian rule. This is how Shahnameh has been composed by Firdausi in a way that has got so many ramifications, so many consequences, and so many other cascading effects which has molded and shaped Persian civilization through the ages. Apart from that it is a historical narrative of Iran, it is considered to be one of the literary pillars of Persian literature. Now, this pillar of Persian literature, as I said, is written in a meter which is very rhythmic. For example, the rhythm of this meter is fa'ulun, 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 fa'al. This is the Bahr Mutaqarib, what they call it, and the entire pattern, rhythmic pattern, is in the same meter. And it is not only the narrative of war alone. There are beautiful romances, there are beautiful other events which are taking place, the construction of universities, the establishment of empires, the conflict of states, and the prosperity of one part of land, the deprivation of other parts, the interface of cultures, the intermingling of cultures. Beautiful girls from China coming to Iran and dancing, and in the parties, different parties were thrown, wines were served, exotic foods were served, shikars, name anything. What is in the world is in the Shahnameh, and what is not in the Shahnameh is not in the world. That type of literature Ferdowsi has produced for mankind. Now, such book which has enjoyed such a popularity, and we are not discussing about how Ferdowsi was treated by Mahmud Ghaznavi. These are all some of the discourses which are very controversial, and they do not lead us to any definite conclusion. Whether there was Mahmud Ghaznavi or there was no Mahmud Ghaznavi, but still Shahnameh is very much there. So kings may go, kings may come, but the poets and their literature are always there and ever present and omnipresent, I would say. But it has made a tremendous impact beyond the frontiers of India. How it has made a tremendous impact beyond the frontiers of Iran? There are beautiful stories. Shahnameh has been translated into English by many Orientalists, whether he is Dick Davis, but I would just refer to Matthew Arnold's Shahnameh. Matthew Arnold, who was a critic, a poet in his own right of English literature, he had also translated the story of Sohrab into English, which forms a classic in English literature, neoclassic in English literature. There, Matthew Arnold doesn't follow the story of Sohrab as it is given in the Shahnameh. It is his own transcreation. But again, the own transcreation is, the Anglo-Saxon mind is a very fertile mind. It has lots of fertility. There is no dearth of imagination. That is why you could see that the poetry of Fitzgerald, the poetry which Fitzgerald has translated into English, at times, outshines the original poetry of Umar Khayyam. That is the figment of his imagination, the flight of his imagination. It takes us into a different field. So there, in case of, for example, in case of when Rustam was, again I would like to draw your attention to one more very nuanced point. We have the translation of the Ramayana by Masihi Panipati, who had translated the Ramayana into Persian. In that Ramayana, there are beautiful couplets, there is beautiful specimen of beautiful poetry. But when it comes about the chastity of Sita, that how chaste is Sita, the chastity of Sita is, again it is followed and emulated from the Shahnameh. That how one can speak about the chastity of Sita. The poet Masihi Panipati says that Sita is so chaste that even the cloth on her body has not seen the body of Sita. Imagine, just like the body has not seen the soul, the cloth has not seen the body of Sita. How beautiful it is Similarly, when Rustam's wife, Tahmina, who was about to be betrothed to Rustam, she comes into the chamber of Rustam at the dead of the night. There, Firdausi again says about the woman that she is so chaste that even the birds had not seen her in the open. Imagine the chastity of Tahmina and the chastity of Ramayana, of Sita, are so parallel. It stems from the narrative of Shahnameh. Now, let us come about and talk about the reception of Shahnameh in the Indian subcontinent. This reception, there are many. I would say that it is again a Pandora box. If we go on discussing the impact of Shahnameh on India, it starts from Gilgit and goes down to east of Bengal altogether. Such or from the top Kashmir down to Kanyakumari. So there is God's plenty enough. There are so many imitations. At every inch of India, at every point of time in India, Shahnameh is being copiously emulated and imitated by various persons, various poets at different places and different. Even Ghalib has written a poem in praise of George V in imitation of Shahnameh. Imagine. So let me draw your attention to only 3 instances, and then I would like to wind up my discourse. In the 14th century, there was a mad king in Delhi whose name was Muhammad bin Tughlaq. This Muhammad bin Tughlaq had ordered that everybody, even the crippled, should migrate to Daulatabad. So that was an imperial dicta and everybody had to obey him. So there was a 99-year-old man who was a learned man whose name was also known in history. So he was compelled to go, and 12 miles away from Delhi when he went away, he died on the way. He could not reach Daulatabad. But his grandson, he managed to reach Daulatabad, and he had borne the brunt of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He had seen how Muhammad bin Tughlaq was dictating and behaving with his subordinates, with his subject, and with his governors. So when the population was forced to go to Daulatabad, that exodus was taking place. So this young boy of 16 years old, whose name was Abdul Malik Esami, he went to Daulatabad. And when he went to Daulatabad in 1346 around, he was very much aggrieved by the dictators of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and he wanted to go to Hajj. The only way, he just like in in India also, when the government becomes too harsh and unbearable, people try to go to Australia or to some other places to find a safe refuge. So in those days also, he wanted that he should go to Makkah in order to save the dicta of this king. But before going to Makkah, he had a plan that he would write a Shahnameh of India. And that Shahnameh was named Shahnameh-i-Hind or Futuhus Salatin. Now this Futuhus Salatin, the very title of this Futuhus Salatin is very absorbing. What is the meaning of this title, Futuhus Salatin? Futuh is the victory of the sultans. So the victory of the sultans against whom? So there were so many sultans, because everybody was sultan during the Sultanate period. It was not only one sultan. The person who was ruling in Awadh was also sultan. The person who was ruling in Bengal was also sultan. The person who was ruling in Deccan was also sultan. So there were many sultans, but the chief among them was Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq in Delhi. So Futuhus Salatin means the victory of the sultans. So these sultans, that means the chiefs, they had come together against Muhammad bin Tughlaq. And they wanted to defy the orders of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and after defying his orders, they established independent kingdoms in different parts of India. One of the independent kingdoms was the Bahmani kingdom in the Deccan. And that, the Bahmani kingdom, this Asami lived in that Bahmani kingdom and composed the Shahnameh. This Shahnameh is again the narrative of the Muslim rule in India from the time of Mahmud Ghaznavi, Muhammad Ghori, Razia, and then the Khaljis, and finally Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So the entire 350 years of the Delhi Sultanate was beautifully composed by Asami in Futuh Salatin. But there the narrative which I would like to share with you in that Futuh Salatin is very amazing. And just one fragment of that narrative I would like to share with you. That one fragment is, Asami says that the two namesakes vine dresses of this garden did the work of spring and autumn. The son of Shahab populated the city, and the son of Tughlaq destroyed it. Now imagine that Delhi was, or India, Delhi was a garden, and where the gardener, there were two gardeners, they were all sons of the sultans. One was the Khaljis, or the Ghorids, whoever they, before Khaljis, they had populated the city. And the son of Tughlaq, that means Muhammad bin Tughlaq, destroyed it. It's a beautiful narrative. When we read it in Persian, of course I've given you a very loose rendering in English, but when we read it in Persian, it becomes so amazing. Now the second reception of Shahnameh, which we find is in the Sikh tradition of Zafarnama by Guru Gobind Singh. I would not say that this could be equal to Shahnameh, because there is no point in equating Zafarnama with Shahnameh, because Zafarnama is a very insignificant literary corpus comprising of only 111 couplets, whereas the magnum opus Shahnameh consisted of 60,000 couplets. Imagine the corpus of literature in the Shahnameh and the corpus of... But what is amazing in Zafarnama and Shahnameh, that Firdausi was not a warrior poet, he was a poet. But Guru Gobind Singh was a warrior poet. He had fought war, he had lived with war, and thus he wrote the Shahnameh. Firdausi had heard war and listened to the narratives of war, and thus he wrote the Shahnameh. That is one point. But what is very amazing in this Shahnameh is that it's not a very amusing type of poetry. Zafarnameh, when we read, it appears to be very amateurish, in the sense it is not so much florid. It lacks the beauty of poetry. It is not that much beautiful as one could see in the Shahnameh of Firdausi. But at times there are one or two couplets which really makes us believe that here he has spoken something, perhaps Firdausi might not have said that. That is an edge of Zafarnameh or on Shahnameh. For example, in that narrative of Zafarnameh, Guru Gobind Singh says that, of course, it consists of 111 couplets. And in that 111 couplets, perhaps 34 couplets are in praise of God the Almighty. Then there are around 25 or somewhat like that, odd numbers, which are against the misrule of Aurangzeb. Then 11 couplets are against Aurangzeb, and there are 5 couplets in praise of Aurangzeb. Imagine. There are 5 couplets which are in praise of Aurangzeb. However, in that narrative, Guru Gobind Singh says that if God blesses a man, one man can fight hundreds and hundreds of people. That is somewhat very amazing, that how a blessed man enjoying, and Mahatma Gandhi is an example in the point. Imagine one Gandhi is standing against the mighty British Empire. That point is proven, the point of Zafarnameh is proven by Gandhi. Now let me draw your attention to the person who had imbibed from the well of Firdausi, Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib. Again, the genius of Ghalib is somewhat, you cannot put Ghalib in watertight compartment. He is a free man and he wants to remain free. You cannot put him into iron jacket. Now Firdausi has written a poem in imitation of Firdausi's Shahnameh, which consists of 1100 couplets. Just add 10 to Zafarnameh, the number would be same. So 1100 couplets. Ghalib is very much known to us. And we know that Ghalib cannot be a Ghalib if he doesn't speak about wine. Ghalib cannot be a Ghalib if he cannot speak about a beautiful woman. Now, that Abre Gohar Bar is considered to be the best poetry of Ghalib. Imagine that only one poem which outshines his entire poetry. It is not my judgment or my viewpoint. This is the judgment of connoisseurs and those people who have worked on Ghalib. It is their opinion that the best poem of Ghalib is Abre Gohar Bar, the pearl bursting cloud. That Abre Gohar Bar poem, which is of 1100 couplets, happens to be an incomplete poem of Ghalib. A. B. It is highly autobiographical. It is not a story of Rustam, Sohrab or anything of the sort. Or he is not concerned what was happening during the British rule in India and what was happening during the post-Mughal rule in India. You don't find any allusions and reference in his Abre Gohar Bar. He talks about himself only. And there, you know very well that how he has derided the concept of Jannat. He doesn't want to enter into paradise. So he says that praise God. He becomes so supplicating and so imploring before God the Almighty that he tries to praise Him in different manners. And then having praised Him, he followed the structure of that narrative. After praising him, then he praises the Holy Prophet. And then he tries to discuss the celestial journey of Holy Prophet from this earth to the other heavens. And that is, the mullahs will not be able to explain you the journey, celestial journey of Ghalib from this earth to the other heavenly bodies. It is only Ghalib who is going to map the route. He is saying, after all, what is God? The question arises that what is God? According to the Islamic concept of God, Allah, He is light upon light. That is the only description of Allah in the Quran, that Allah is light upon Nurul ala Nur, light upon light. Now, if that is the domain of light, and Prophet Muhammad is traversing the long journey, uphill task, now he is entering into different orbits, heavenly orbits. When he is entering into heavenly orbits, in one of the orbits, the light was there. It was very luminous. Then how to define the quantum of life? The quantum of life is defined by Ghalib that it is so luminous that the bats are taking refuge in the sun. Imagine. The bats are taking refuge in the sun. That the sunlight would be sort of darkness before that light. However, coming back to Ghalib, when he talks about himself in Abre Gohar Bar, he says that, my Lord, I have not sinned any, I have never looted any bank like Modi and Malia and all these people. I am just a simple soul. At times I have taken some wine in my life. That is the only sin I have done. But why you are asking this question to me, Ghalib, that how much wine you have taken? Why don't you ask Jamshid and Parveez and Bahram, who had opened the wine shop in their houses, who had drowned themselves in wine, and they had lived in wine, they lived with wine, they lived in wine. Ghalib, the accursed one, had only taken a little bit of wine. Why you are asking that? And why should I go to your heaven? That heaven will not give me the charm at the dead of the night when I am going into the alleys of Delhi at the dead of the night, having taken wine with open sherwani and just tilting in one direction to another direction and then following into the streets and somebody picking me up at the dead of the night and taking me to my home. These things are there, they are no more there in your heaven. Why should I go to your heaven? The pleasure of drinking wine in this earth is not the pleasure of drinking wine in your paradise. And then he talks about the huris of those Jannat. He says that what is the fun in intimating with those huris? I hardly know them, nor do they know me. And there is no, duel between us. There is no relationship between us beforehand and afterwards. So what I would do with those huris? We don't have any connect. In that way, he tries to give you a beautiful narrative of his life, of his inner feeling. But then there are beautiful motives which are drawn by Ghalib. He says that, my Lord, I would like to make a lamp, and that lamp would not be lit in a house. That lamp would not be burned by oil. There would not be any moth around that lamp. That would be in my heart. It would be burned by the pains and sufferings of humanity. This is how Ghalib talks about his own self and then nuances of poetry in his Abre Gohar Bar, which is but a replica and representation of the Shahnameh. Shahnameh has indeed been a piece of literature which has made a tremendous impact upon the life and letters of the subcontinent. I think I should end here. Thank you very much.